Okay, guys, good morning. Chris and Josh, Row Grappling here once again with another edition of Coffees and Crossfaces at the glorious Cask and Kettle. This morning we're joined today by an exceptional guest, Team Canada wrestler, multi-time international medalist, graduate from the Women Lead Sports Program at United Wrestling Federation, and the executive director for Lit NB Wrestling, Samantha Stewart. So, Samantha, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us and making the drive down. We're very happy to have you.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So one of the things I know I want to get into right away is you were just away on camp in America training with some of the Team USA wrestlers. Can you tell us, one, what you are preparing for, and two, a bit about your camp experience?
Yeah, so really the two things that I'm prepping for in May are the Pan American Championships, which is first weekend of May, happening in Mexico. And then 3 weeks later, we have our Canadian team trials for our world team that it's happening at the last weekend of May. So I compete on the 7th or 8th of May, and then again on the 28th.
Oh my goodness. Two big tournaments back to back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you had some time in the States. You were in Colorado Springs,
yes,
and then off to Michigan, and then back to Colorado Springs, which is a great story in terms of time zones.
Yeah.
But tell us a bit about what you did in those two locations and your experience there.
Yeah, so really, like, my coach, Don Ryan, has a pretty good relationship with the women's national team coach down in the US, Terry Steiner. So they often talk about when our schedules can align, just because it's way more financially feasible to go down to the US to train and get to some high-level training camps and get good partners than it is to go all the way to Europe. Or sometimes to even travel across Canada, because we have run into issues where it's actually been cheaper to go to Europe than it has been to fly across the country. So I have gone and done training camps out in like Calgary and stuff, but it is still like pretty expensive, especially when you look at like flight costs. You have to look at housing, food, transit when you're in the city, like getting a rental car. So it all adds up. So we try to really do things like as cheaply as possible, just because like we don't get a lot of funding, unfortunately. Wrestling is definitely not, like, if you're going into sport for money, wrestling is not the one, especially amateur wrestling. So we really try to do things as cheaply as possible, and flying down to the US, those flights are pretty cheap. And then while I'm down there, I'm fortunate enough to have a really good friend who used to wrestle on the US national team, Whitney Conder, that I go stay with. So I actually stay with her and don't have any cost when it comes to like housing. And this last time I was down there, she actually had like a pretty free schedule, just because she's in the military, but she's in the Soldier Recovery Unit, SRU. So she is actually off a lot of the time doing like appointments and stuff like that. So her schedule is pretty open to be able to like drive me to practice. So I didn't even have to get a rental car.
That's cool.
So really I just had to pay for my flights and my food. So it was
That's a huge relief for an amateur athlete, absolutely.
Yeah, so that was like a huge bonus for me. So I went down on the 3rd of March, trained there for like a week and a day. And then we had a US national team training camp in Michigan. And that was kind of in conjunction with Rudis did their first super match. So they had a best 2 out of 3 matchup with Jaden Cox and Kyle Snyder. And then they had a bunch of other Rudis sponsored athletes fill the card. So a lot of the girls that I was training with were actually on the Rudis card.
Oh, cool.
So it was super cool. They set up in a casino. It was like broadcast. Rudis is really trying to like change the face of wrestling. They do a lot of like, they do boots, they do clothing, but they also have like an app now. So you can like get this app and watch wrestling videos, which is super cool. So they're
like the wrestling version of Flow Grappling, probably.
Yeah. So we have Flow Wrestling, but now Rudis is like competing with them.
There you go. Yeah.
Which I think a little friendly competition is good. It means that
Absolutely,
one person's not cornering the market, and you get more content. So I'm all for it. So we had that event, and then afterwards we had like morning training sessions, and then in the afternoon we went and watched NCAAs.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys have ever watched NCAA wrestling,
100%. Yeah.
The spectacle is insane.
Oh, it is an incredible like vibe to the it's packed stadium, not stadiums, like packed huge gymnasiums. Like, what an experience.
So they were set up in the Little Caesars Arena downtown Detroit, where the hockey team plays, and had all these mats, 10 mats I think they started out with, and then like all the stands were full. There was people in suites, like I think they said there was like over 17,000 spectators like in a single session. So, and then multiply that by how many sessions they had, it was like 3 days long, 2 sessions a day. So it was insane, just the number of fans that were there watching.
Wild. Yeah, no, I see like it comes up on like my feed and social media, and you see some of the like especially even like high school athletes get an incredible treatment in a lot of spaces in America, and it'd be wonderful to see that kind of translate to Canada. And it should. The quality of the grappling, the quality of wrestling is outstanding, and we talk about it all the time how good the grappling is here on the East Coast. But to actually be there, and I mean, I see it from social media kind of picture, and it's impressive. I can't imagine what the actual energy would be like in the room.
It was insane. Like just the sheer amount of people and like the spectacle of the entire setup. Like they had the big like Jumbotron playing these like crazy hype videos that they had created of like the round before. They had all these like cool action shots, and like they had a little video of like the city of Detroit was like featured because that was the host, and it was insane. Like I was taking videos of it being like, we need to have this in Canada. Like, how do we make this happen? Because it's really like that fan base and that level of like dedication and stuff to the sport that I think has been like monumental in why they have so much depth in their national team program.
Yeah.
And I know like our population is smaller, obviously, but there's no reason why we can't have like a similar depth in our programs here. So
yeah,
I think it would be sweet if we set something up like that.
Yeah, let's be working towards it all the time. Can you tell us, like, was there any difference between the programming from Colorado Springs to Michigan?
Yeah, so, okay, so when I first went to Colorado Springs is at altitude, which is one of the reasons I go down to train, because it's amazing for when you come back down to sea level, you feel like a god. So basically, like, that was one of the reasons why I went, but the way it was structured, I feel like I didn't get as much as when I usually go for like multiple weeks at a time. So I like went there for a week, and as I started getting used to it, then we went back down to sea level to Michigan. And
How long does it take for your body to sort of acclimate?
Kind of like 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
Everyone jokingly says like you never get used to it. Like you always feel some effect of it. Like walking up the stairs, you're winded. You do live goes, and like you do one little scramble, and you're like winded. Like it's crazy. And yeah, I don't think people who haven't trained at altitude have no idea like how hard it is on your lungs to be like that oxygen deprived.
Yeah.
But after, when you get back to sea level, and like you feel amazing, and like your cardio is way better. I don't know all the sciencey terms, but your like blood hemoglobin goes up. So yeah, I find that really beneficial. And kind of when I got there the week before, a lot of the girls were training for the super match. So it was kind of like prepping for a tournament for them. So it was like very specific stuff they were working on to like prepare for their opponents. And so when we did like individual technique, it was like they had their thing they were working on. And then my coach, who I message like every time I'm away, we have like game plans and stuff for practice, even if he's not able to be there. So we had like a list of things that I wanted to work on. So they would be working on like, oh, I need to work on like shot recovery. And I'd be like, okay, I need to work on like 2-on-1 defense and like breaking ties. So then we'd go back and forth, and we'd both be drilling our individual techniques.
So do you do camps before competitions, or is it just you're always training?
Just always training.
Yeah.
I mean, usually if we have like an international training camp, it's usually after the competition. Because like prior to the competition, people are often like just doing their own thing, and like they want to have their own like structure to get ready for a competition. And they don't want to train with international partners like right before they compete against them.
Okay.
So it's still kind of like that element of surprise, and like you have your game plan. You don't want to like if I'm getting ready for a tournament and I'm like practicing like specific moves and stuff, like I don't want to practice with the person I'm going to compete against. Then they know that this
You've been drilling this.
Yeah, this is the game plan, that this is my like go-to attack. Like, no, like if you want to know that stuff, you have to do the work. You have to look up videos of me wrestling. You have to scout me. Like, I'm not just going to go practice with you and like give you all the answers right before we have the test. Like,
right.
I want to do my own prep, and then when we get in there, we'll see who prepared better.
So do you do hard matches like in the weeks leading up, or the 2 weeks leading up? I know with jiu-jitsu, a lot of guys, they'll sort of back off. They'll do their cardio and they'll just go through the motions stuff, but they don't want to risk an injury before.
Yeah, so usually we go hard like up until like a week before. A lot of our competitions are kind of like structured over the weekend, so it'll be like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. A lot of the time it'll be like Greco first, women's wrestling, and then freestyle wrestling. So I'm oftentimes like on a Friday or a Saturday, depending on if it starts a Thursday. So I kind of know, like, you get the program in advance, so you know like what day you're competing. So like both Pan Ams and World Team Trials, I'm competing on the Saturday. So it's usually like we go into the location on like Tuesday or Wednesday for World Team Trials, because it's like in Alberta, and it's like not like we're going overseas with like a big time difference. It'll probably be like on a Thursday. But usually when you're like going where there's like a huge time difference, like over to Europe, you want to have like a little bit more time just to get there and get acclimated a little bit to prepare. And then usually when we're there, it is very like high intensity, low resistance. So it's not like live wrestling where the person's like defending 100%, but it is stuff that's like higher intensity. So you're doing like speed drills. You want to feel like sharp, crisp, like ready. So you're still doing stuff at like a high level, but it's not as abrasive, because you're not doing like,
You don't want that risk.
yeah, you don't want the person like defending against you like 100%. Like that's where the injury part can come in.
Yeah, you're still keeping like the fast twitch muscle fiber kind of primed, and muscle memory still going, and right on. So I know as executive director for Lit NB Wrestling, obviously there's a whole other kind of hat that you have to wear in addition to preparing for your professional and academic career, and then your athletic career, and now working as, literally trying to grow the sport of wrestling and introduce that to a brand new audience, brand new generation. So can you tell us a bit about the initiatives there?
Yeah, so I got hired last year in June, and unfortunately Wrestling New Brunswick didn't really get to do a whole lot during the pandemic.
COVID shuttered a lot of things.
Yeah, so, and combat sports, as I'm sure everybody in the audience is aware, that like we got hit probably the hardest, just because those like close contact sports had a lot more restrictions, and we weren't able to come back and do programming really the same way that like outdoor sports and like low contact like soccer or something would be able to do. So we really had to like kind of adapt, and I know people were trying to come back and like get their programs running again, but then we'd shut down again. And that's probably like way harder than if we just said like we can't wrestle for 2 years. It was that like, oh, can we come back? No. Oh, can we come back? No. It was like
You can come back partially, but you can only work with one person, all kinds of
Yeah, so it's been crazy. Even this year, like we started our high school season. We had one high school competition, and then we got shut down again with the winter plan. And we were like really optimistic. We like still scheduled our like winter training camp after Christmas, but of course with like everything the way it was, that got shut down. Going back into lockdown in January, we really had to adjust, and our high school season got pushed, which kind of had an effect on our athletes who do multiple sports.
Of course.
So those athletes had a really difficult time. Like some of them, I know the coaches talked to the spring sport coaches saying like, listen, we really want to salvage the season. Like this is really important for our sport. Is there any way we can keep your athlete for a couple extra weeks before they transfer into the spring sport? So thankfully, I think like a lot of kids were able to make that work. But we did lose some kids to the spring sports just because wrestling isn't their like number one sport. So we really struggled during the pandemic, unfortunately, but I'm really looking at this as like, I guess, trying to see the silver lining of this is like a ground zero. Yeah. Because really when you like, I don't want to say we've hit rock bottom, but like our numbers have been like really small compared to prior years. So this is definitely an opportunity to like build and grow from this like foundation of like core athletes that we have that actually stuck around with us over these 2 years and all these challenges. Like now I think of that as like our starting point, and now we can start building and growing again and like only getting better.
Yeah, I think it's a unique opportunity because people have been cooped up for a couple of years and they want to get out now. They want to do stuff. I know, like I was saying earlier, our club alone has experienced some pretty explosive growth over the last couple of months. So I think it's going to be like that across the board for anybody that's advertising. People just want to move.
And I think for the most part, like that, to use like a really clumsy analogy here, like the hardest thing is always to get the engine to turn over.
Yeah. And
like once you get that turnover the first time, things can really start hopefully ramping up. So I know in support of that, and one of the things we talked about is that really getting wrestling out there to a new generation, and that's not necessarily just youth. It's just opening it up to more people and kind of having them experience wrestling as a sport, as a method of fitness, as whatever you want to call it. Can you tell us a bit about the directions you're taking there and how you're trying to work that in?
Yeah, so I'm not trying to gatekeep wrestling anymore. So anybody who is like familiar with the long-term athlete development model, there's like the whole competitive stream, like that's really where wrestling is focused in the past on like competition. And it's kind of like, you start wrestling, you want to be national champion. Once you've been national champion, you go to like all the international competitions, you want to be world champion, you want to go to the Olympics. There's like a whole other side of wrestling where people can participate recreationally, and it doesn't have to be like going to these competitions and like being world champion, because realistically, like there's a lot of people in the sport that like that's not the goal for them. They're just like wrestling in university, they're like high school wrestlers, like maybe they don't see themselves like wrestling for the national team, maybe they want to transition out of wrestling into MMA. Like there are so many different goals that people have that like wrestling does not have to be this one stream, it can be many things for many people. So really what I want to do is like open that up for like active for life is what it's called, and really it's like less stress on competition, and like you can compete if you want to, but really it's about reframing wrestling as a form of fitness instead of just being competition based.
Right. So what you're talking about the Sport NB streams of athlete development, like through Coach NB, or
Yeah, so the long-term,
I know a little bit about it.
Yeah, long-term athlete development was kind of like Sport Canada's way of like determining like each sport at the national level. Like Wrestling Canada has their long-term athlete development model. So based on like what age an athlete is,
Right.
kind of dictates like where they are like physically, mentally, emotionally, like what level of training they should be at and what practices and training should look like, just so that we're not like forcing young athletes to like overtrain and get burnout, and to expect them to be able to like compete and do things at the level of which developmentally they're not at yet. So you have this like pyramid of like, basically you have your like grassroots level where you want to have like the most amount of participants possible, and then you have your like learn to like wrestles, and like where we're really framing the like introduction to wrestling. So that's like your first introduction to the sport. Really we're targeting like the age groups of like 6 to 12 right now, just to start rebuilding like our competitive stream. That's kind of where we're going with this, because we have 5 introduction to wrestling. The last 3 also have a competition component.
Oh, nice.
So so they have a chance to like actually like learn how to compete.
Like during the clinic, like at the end of it, or?
Yeah, so the clinic
cool.
is like 90 minutes, and then they'll get like a half-hour break, and then they have like a little competition. So it's kind of like a jamboree. You get matched up with like kids that are similar weight to you, and you just go out and have fun and like learn how to
You
use
get the
the
full
moves.
experience in one day. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great idea. It's like one of the things I personally found a really insightful comment when you and I were first introduced, and we were talking about kind of the differences. And you mentioned things like gatekeeping wrestling, and the competition stream seems to be the one that has the most focus right now. And what I found really insightful about that comment is when we think about jiu-jitsu, and I'd love to get your opinion too on your experience in things like Muay Thai and MMA, because there's a bunch of different angles we can approach this question from. Is jiu-jitsu really seems to have figured out appealing to a very broad mass. Like, you walk into any club in the Maritimes and you're going to see law enforcement and teachers and engineers and accountants and kids. And I mean, we've got like Bruce is what, 72? It's remarkable. We've got the whole gamut. And for whatever reason, jiu-jitsu just seems to have that cultured, natural byproduct of jiu-jitsu. And from your experience in going through the wrestling system, like where do you think, where's the difference there culturally? How do you bridge that gap? How do we make it so it's trained for life and recreational? Like that sounds like a really challenging exercise.
Yeah, so really I think it's about like changing the culture, like the cultural attitudes, even just like within the clubs. Because really like along that pyramid of like going up, like your athlete numbers reduce at like every like gap there is, like every transition to the next level. You will see
Are you
like
talking about age or skill?
So both, because like you start with your like grassroots, and then you get into like your middle school, high school, and then you get into like university, and then you have like junior national team, senior national team, like that stuff. Like as you go up that pyramid, like kids start dropping off. Like your middle school kids might not wrestle for high school. Your high school kids might not wrestle in university. A lot of our like senior level clubs are based out of university. So kids who don't go to university will think, oh, I can't wrestle anymore. even though those clubs can still be accommodating, like our club, Black Bears in Fredericton, we have had athletes that like went to STU, like weren't UNB students. Like, yes, we have a lot of UNB students, but we also had like students with the like College of Craft and Design downtown. We have had people that like went into trades, like NBCC is right there too. So you don't have to be a university student to like continue wrestling past high school, which I think is like a major misconception.
Yeah, no, I didn't know that either. Yeah.
Yeah, so especially.
But you do have to be a student at some sort of.
No. So like I graduated, I'm still competing for the club.
Okay, wow.
Promise hasn't been in school in a number of years. He's still competing for the club.
There's a little dig to my old buddy Promise being an old man like me.
Did we touch base on where you do the bulk of your training?
Yeah, the bulk of my training is done in Fredericton, New Brunswick. We have the wrestling mats down full time at the UNB campus in the Lady Beaverbrook gym basement.
And I guess anybody can come train.
Anybody can come train.
That's huge. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and like so our main like core training group is obviously the competition training group. But I'm really trying to like restructure things so like that whole like pyramid, you can step off at any point to active for life. And there's ways that like if you don't want to compete anymore, like I want to make it able that people can still train, like regardless of where you're at.
Yeah.
And even if you're not on this competitive stream, like anyone can join Active for Life. So one of the things I'm like really looking forward to starting up is like adult learn to wrestles as well, because like we've had a number of people like university students or like people who moved to Fredericton and they're like, hey, we saw that you have this club, like do you need to have experience to join? And unfortunately in the past the answer has been yes, because it's really difficult like when we have our core training group that's like focused on like winning world team trials and stuff like that. It's hard for somebody to step in that has no experience. Like it kind of is a mismatch. Like it's not a good fit for either person, because the person who has like the competitive experience and has been in the sport for 10 years is going to be really frustrated trying to teach a beginner when they just want to train and practice and get better and like they're prepping to compete. And your person who like has no experience feels really intimidated coming into the room with all these people that have been in the sport for a number of years.
Yeah, hardcore killers. Yeah.
So really, I want to kind of like take away those barriers and have like a recreational, like 1 or 2 nights a week, have that like adult introduction to wrestling where it's like less pressure to be at that level. And really they can just come out, learn the sport, have fun, like stay fit. It's a form of like how you have like grappling or like boxing classes, or like anybody can come join and like.
That's literally how we introduce people to jiu-jitsu. And I think the average age for somebody like a new student starting is like 30. So it's a far cry from elementary school and middle school. So, and like you said, it's intimidating at that age to go in. So.
And it's like, I mean, if you get to the point where like you've done these like adult wrestling classes for like a couple years and you want to compete, like there are still opportunities. A lot of the competitions in Canada are open. So there are ones that are just for like the university students that are like invitationals. But then a lot of the tournaments are like open tournaments.
I didn't know that either.
So literally anybody can go wrestle. Like you can go compete. Like we have had athletes that like out west, there's like this athlete, Jeremy Podlog, who's like in his 40s and still competing because he just enjoys it. And if you are in the space where like you just have fun competing and going out there and testing your skills, like that's available to you. Obviously you're going to be in that competition stream with other people that are like trying to be world champion, but like if that's what you want to do, like those options are available.
I didn't know any of this.
No, it's I mean, we had the occasion a few years ago to drive down to Fredericton. A few of us went up and trained with Promise just in the basement. But I honestly, I didn't know that it was the kind of thing that just open affiliation, Popeyes. So keep that in mind. Anybody who's in the area. One of the things I also find really interesting about your personal profile is your background in academics and specifically psychology. Can you talk about how that has translated into both your wrestling career and your competitive career?
Yeah, so basically, growing up, my mom is actually a licensed counseling therapist.
Runs in the family.
Okay. So in Ontario, the designation is she's a registered psychotherapist. But here, like my licensing is licensed counseling therapist. Right now, I'm a candidate because I'm not fully licensed. So basically, like I grew up with it and knew the importance of like mental performance, knew the importance of like taking care of your mental health. So really it seemed like the obvious choice to like go into that for academics. And so when I was like born and raised in London, Ontario, actually, And my mom is a grad of Western, so it was just kind of like the default choice, I guess, to go to Western and to do psychology. So really, like, I did that year there before transitioning over here. And when I made that transition, I was like, I'm really interested in looking at like the aspect in terms of like sport, because even like in my career later, I want to still be involved in sport and giving back to athletes and really helping people achieve their potential and like make their goals happen.
It's a huge advantage as an athlete, especially for competing.
Oh,
I mean, you hear that thing about like 90% of sport is mental. So, I mean, it's a really big factor. And if I can like help give back to the sport when I'm done competing as an athlete and I'm retired from sport, then I can still give back and be involved in the sporting community in some way with something that I consider like one of my strengths. So when I transitioned to UMB, I actually Dawn introduced me to David Scott, who's the sports psychology professor in the kinesiology department. So I actually transitioned from arts over to kin. And so that was what I did. My first degree was a Bachelor of Recreation and Sport Studies. And my focus was on the sports psychology. I took all Scotty's sports psych classes, as well as doing my minor in psychology. But it was kind of there that I also realized that there's kind of this like two pathways of practitioners. The majority of practitioners who are working in sports psychology, you have your like kin trained grads who don't have that like counseling, like mental health background. And then you have your like counseling psychology, like clinical psychologists and stuff that don't necessarily have the like sports specific training. And so really, I think you need to like put those both together, because there's enough of a demand that like athletes really now, like thankfully, thanks to like Clara Hughes and like the Bella Let's Talk movement, there's been a huge shift in like athlete mental health awareness, because like being an athlete, like you're not immune to all that stuff that like everybody else is. In fact, like some of those pressures, like having to perform on the world stage,
amplified.
Yeah, especially things like post-game depression, like after you've been preparing to compete in like the Olympic Games, and you have so much attention put on you, you have like so much support staff, your teammates, your coaches, like everyone around you is like in your sport. So then when that's over and you realize, like, you kind of have that moment of like, okay, like what now? Like winning this medal didn't change me as a person. And now all of a sudden,
accomplished my goals, now what?
Yeah. And you have that like, now that you're like done the games, it's like you don't have as much attention on you. You don't have as much, like the people around you like aren't like solely focused on like getting you to achieve your goal. And it's kind of like, okay, what next?
It's almost like the community dissolves back to their own individual tracks.
Yeah.
And they come together to support whatever the athlete is for the candidacy for that particular event. And then after that's gone, the athlete is kind of left with, okay, what next?
Yeah.
And it's not the support disappears, but people wind up going back to their day-to-day.
And when you've had that much like excitement and like
Adrenaline.
Yeah, and just like the amazing like spectacle that the Olympics are, and you've been through that, and then you go back to like your daily life after, like it's so hard for athletes to like adjust back to like a normal routine after they've been like prepping to like compete at this one thing. It's like afterwards, it's just like, wow, this like huge transition. And I don't think that people like necessarily realize that that happens. So athletes being like outspoken about it on social media and stuff, and I think is really important that like people that aren't involved in high performance athletics actually know like what happens during those times. Like
prepare them beforehand.
Yeah, and even things like, one of the things I'm like really focused on is like athlete identity. So a lot of athletes, like their identity is wrapped up in being an athlete and like being a part of their sport. Like even myself, like up until like the last, not these past Olympic trials, the one before in 2016, like I was 100% going down that pathway. Like I had kind of gone down the like development as a human being, like outside of sport, but like it was just kind of like, oh yeah, here's my like plan B, like this is who I am like outside of sport, kind of. But I hadn't really like developed and been like well-rounded and had a lot of stuff going on in my life outside of sport. I was like, that all comes secondary, like wrestling's
Right.
number one. So really it was like kind of a shift and a focus into like, you need to develop as like a whole person, not just like you and your sport. because a lot of the time, like, you know, when you first meet someone, you're like, oh, what do you do? And like, obviously athletes are like, oh, I'm an athlete.
I throw people into the air.
Yeah. And I mean, I still tell people like I'm a wrestler, but like I know now I'm so much more than a wrestler, and I have so many more interests like outside of just my sport. And really, like, I've developed into a whole like well-rounded individual with lots of like interests and things going on, not just my sport, because I think that like singular focus, like, and having the blinders on and just focusing on your sport is like great for performance, but like after the performance, or if you don't succeed in that performance, like it is devastating.
Yeah, that's a really insightful comment, and it speaks to the need for everybody to kind of, you know, truly be well-rounded. Is there anything that, like, when you think about, you know, other athletes that you've seen go through maybe not exactly this scenario but things like that, is there anything that seems to be broadly applicable from a sports psychology standpoint, where you would just, not that I'm asking for a clinical recommendation on the spot, but what would you recommend somebody in preparation for that, or trying to tell them it's okay to not be singularly focused on athletics?
Yeah, I think like if you're preparing for like a major games, like I don't think you can ever truly prepare. Like I have known athletes that competed in Tokyo where like they knew going in that like they had heard about like the post-game blues, and like they knew that was going to happen, but like nothing they did really like prepared them for it. And that's the thing. It's like I don't think anything really prepares you for it, but like having an awareness of it and knowing what resources are available to you when
Knowing
you
it's
are
normal to experience afterwards makes a world of difference.
yeah, and even things like now, like Sport Canada and like Athletes Can and stuff like that really have like a lot of resources for you. And there's like a program called Game Plan where like you have access to a bunch of stuff. So like career development tools, you have access to like mental health services. And like one of the things that they've been doing recently, like since the start of the pandemic, is having kind of like athlete groups come together virtually to just kind of like talk. And so one of the things that like when I failed to qualify for Tokyo, I was like devastated. And like that's really hard when like you don't achieve like your big
when
goal.
that's your identity.
So really it was kind of like an athlete support group, and like Game Plan had kind of like sent out an email to like any of the athletes that didn't qualify for the games that are like interested in coming to this athlete support group. Like here's a Zoom meeting time, like come and like share your feelings. So there was about like 12 of us that were on the call, and really it was just kind of like, it was a little bit of commiserating, but it was also like very helpful to know that like you're not alone in this. Mm-hmm. And so they do the same thing like after the games as well. Like they connect everybody, like, and obviously going to the games and like when you're at a major training center and stuff, I know a lot of the athletes had like other athlete friends that had gone through something similar in different sports. So they kind of had those people in their network already to be able to like connect with people that have been through it and know that they're like not alone, even though you feel kind of alone because you're like, nobody understands what I'm going through right now. But there's like a whole group of athletes that like, I don't know how many athletes we sent to the Tokyo Olympics, like hundreds. There's like so many athletes that know what you're going through. And really it's just about like being able to connect with those people and know that like you're not alone. You do have support, like you're not isolated in feeling what you're feeling. And there are resources available if you need to talk to someone.
Yeah, yes, sir. It's impressive to know that you had 12 people be able to come out and be part of that group, because like I know mental health is still this thing that does, everybody struggles with the stigma. It's so hard to be willing to open up and talk, and maybe especially as combat athletes, you know, there's a certain uniqueness to something between wrestling and jiu-jitsu and judo and karate and boxing and Muay Thai and all these things. Like it is a team preparation thing, but when you walk out there on the mats, like it's you. Right. You know, and it really is like say boxing is the loneliest sport in the world. I mean, you can apply that to any combat sport, because when you're out there, that's it. So it's really impressive to know you had 12 athletes that were, even if they weren't all necessarily, you know, grappling or combat focused, but being able to share those experiences and kind of lean on each other and find that support, because mental health is so key. It's getting a lot more attention, as it should. And it's, you know, it's good to see that. It's good to know that's out there.
And thankfully, like Game Plan and Sport Canada have really like taken that like to heart, and the people that they have working for them are people that have both. They're people who are like, they have that sport experience, they've worked in the sport community, like they were either a former athlete, they were a coach, they had some involvement in sport to like understand like that side of what you're going through.
So that's why they're so proactive with it, because I think if they left it for the athletes to come, like, this program exists, come find us, nobody would go.
Yeah.
But the fact that they reach out, they probably get 80% of them
Yeah.
they reach out to. That's amazing.
And so the people they have like leading those sessions and like when you're accessing the like support staff and stuff for like mental health, like they have mental health training and they have that sports specific knowledge. So they have both combined because like
That's a big deal.
that's really huge for athletes. And it's like, it doesn't have to be the same sport, but just like being like in the sporting community and knowing what that's all about, like you just immediately feel as an athlete that you don't have to explain that to someone. Like when I have talked to practitioners in the past that like don't have any like sport experience, trying to talk about like preparing for a tournament, like what that looks like what being away at a training camp looks like.
Right.
Like you feel like you just have to explain like your entire life to this person and there's like a disconnect.
You're like an alien.
Yeah, I feel like it's like a huge barrier in building rapport. Like obviously there are still like really good practitioners, but it's like when they don't have that, it's just kind of like as an athlete, it's hard to relate and build that rapport with that person. So even if they have like, I was seeing one person who is like a former athletic director, like they got it. Like I didn't have to explain everything about like how it worked, like my schedule, those kind of things. And then I have seen people who like didn't have that sport background, but had the mental health stuff. And it was like crazy because like one of the things I was talking about, like how much like stress I was under and like my anxiety about competing and like some of the like sport politics that have been going on. And the person was like, I don't know if they were serious in this, but it just like took me aback. And I just like didn't go back and see this person after, but was like, oh, like it sounds like this is causing a lot of stress in your life and you know like it's making you miserable.
Oh, they don't understand it's a priority, just cut it out.
Yeah. Why don't you just quit?
Yeah.
Right.
And I was like, quit.
That's not an option.
I was like, that's not an option.
Yeah.
Like regardless of all this other stuff going on and like, yeah, I have my stress of competing. Yeah, I have to like make weight. There's like other people that are like vying for my team spot. There's like politics happening at like the National Sports Center and stuff. Like all of that stuff like doesn't matter. Like I love wrestling. Like this is what I do. Like I'm not just gonna quit because things are hard. And I think like combat sports especially, that's like our mentality. It's like adversity makes you stronger.
It's so hard to explain to doctors. Like it's a running joke in the jiu-jitsu community that you get a weird injury, like you blow out your ACL or something. The doctors, they think if you anyways, bend your fingernail backwards, you should quit.
Yeah.
Whereas guys are going through total like a knee replacement surgery and they still want to be in the sport. They're like, I don't understand it, but it's a different mentality.
Yeah. So basically like I've had that happen too, where like when I was younger, I like had a back injury and the doctor told me I'd never wrestle again. I was like, watch me. Like, obviously I'm going to wrestle again. Come on. But even like a few years ago, I broke my hand and the doctor was like, oh, all right, we're going to put a cast on it. And I was like, no. You're not putting like this giant lump of plaster on my arm so that I can't like train for the next like 3 months.
Yeah. They don't understand it.
Yeah. I was like, I want one of those like cool, fancy, like sports science removable casts where you can still like do treatment and stuff on it. And he was like, no. So, I don't know if I should be talking about this, but I cut my own cast off so that I could still,
hardcore.
Like, because no one else would touch it. Like no one else would touch another doctor's work. So I was like, if this is gonna happen, like I have to be the one to do it. So I cut my own cast off so that I could still like get treatment on my hand, like move it around, like not lose the like musculature in my like forearm and stuff. And like, I don't know, like people don't understand like 3 months off is like a huge amount of time when like your competitors are training and like if you have muscle atrophy like added on to that, that's like a huge setback.
That's one thing I find like in jiu-jitsu specifically, if I'm off for any length of time, whether it's personal commitments or injury or illness or whatever it is, like the rust comes on so fast. And not just
after a week, my cardio is gone.
Yeah. It's shocking. So especially let's say when you're a high level, kind of tuned machine and you've got international competition, people vying for your spot at the national team level, and just the natural kind of competitiveness that I think we all bring when you're training on the mats, because you all want to do well and work on the things you want to work on and prove to be successful and get them successful.
Yeah.
That's
3 months isn't even an option.
Can't just twiddle your thumbs.
Unless you're not functional. Like if something's just straight up not working and I can't make it to the mat, then that's an issue. But I've seen guys, they'll show up with the cast, they're recreational players, so it's fine. It's twice a week, but they're still rolling. They're still training with the cast on.
Oh yeah, there's always something that you can do, and like I've had like so many injuries. Thankfully, like broken bone was the most serious one. Never had surgery. But when I have an injury, it's like I still train. I treat my rehab like training. And like there are still things that you can do when you come out to practice. Like we have a hand bike. So like when I hurt my knee, like I was doing the hand bike instead of like doing this like sitting bike, just because like I didn't have that movement yet. So I wasn't able to like do some of those things, but like thankfully like my strength and conditioning coach and like the exercise physiologist I work with, like they're very adaptable and they're like so knowledgeable. So like if I have an injury, like they're able to adapt my program and we're able to make something work where like you can still train.
The rest of your body still exists even though your elbow hurts.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Well, I know we have a ton of the Ask Me Anything questions, and some of them are probably going to be quite involved answers. So do you want to kick us off on that one?
Sure, we'll start with the first one. What advice would you give somebody looking to get involved into grappling sports, whether competitive or recreationally?
I think the biggest thing is like, I sound like a Nike ad, just do it.
Yeah.
Really, I think it's super intimidating, but like there is like no better feeling than being involved, like, and being a part of a community. And so really it's like taking that first step is like sometimes the hardest thing to do, but it's like the most rewarding. Like, I don't think that there's like anything like negative that's going to happen from trying something new. Like really it's about having that like open kind of like growth mindset and just being able to like push that like take risks kind of thing. So I think that like you have to, if you want like big rewards, you have to take big risks. Like that. So
yeah, growth doesn't happen where you're comfortable.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right?
And there really is a community behind it. It's not like a spin class where you go in, you do your thing, and you leave, and you don't talk to anybody. Like you become friends with these people.
Jiu-jitsu's a fucking cult.
Just
gonna say it.
Which I don't know that like people who haven't been involved like probably don't realize that, because they think, oh, it's an individual sport.
Right, yeah.
But it's like you have training partners and stuff. You can still have a team, even though you're like out there competing by yourself. Like you're not in
you
isolation.
Get very close with them. They're like brothers and sisters after a while.
Exactly.
Take us through some of the mental preparation that goes into competing at your level, and how has your academics supported that process?
Yeah, so basically I got kind of like the back entry level, like, I guess, experience, like looking at all of the like theory and stuff behind what I was actually like practicing on the mat. So not only do like, I don't know, I like to know how like things work and stuff. So really like, I feel like that has benefited me a lot. It's like, I have my own mental performance consultant that I see, but it's like when we're talking about things and like, we went through all the basic like sports psych 101. So it's like goal setting, like mental self-talk, like we went through imagery, all that stuff. Like, but now I also have like the theoretical background behind it. So I understand like how it works, why it works. I've seen the literature showing that it works. So really it's kind of like having that like background knowledge that like I know empirically this works. I have seen the literature. Yep. I have read the peer-reviewed journal articles. I have done my own research and studies and like been able to see like tangibly in these numbers that like it works. It's not just like some pseudoscience. Like this actually is applicable. And if you talk to any high level athlete, they'll talk about like the mentality of being a high performance athlete. And really, I think like it's not just about like in sports, like you can bring a high performance mindset to like any avenue. You can take it to your job. You can take it to like, I know there's a lot of people in the military that now like work on the mental performance side of things. So really you can take it into like any avenue that you're pursuing. If you like have any goal in life, like you can apply mental performance strategies to be able to achieve your goals. So.
Very cool. Now I can read this next question upside down because it's short. Yeah. This is from Josh Presley. Obviously a super high level international competitor in his own right, and a great guy to be around. He was asking, who are your favorite wrestlers to watch?
Ooh, okay. I have a few. Some of them are retired now, but I mean, anytime you watch like the Japanese women's national team, like they're amazing, and like that's the best program in the world.
Oh, really?
Like for women's wrestling, Japan, #1. I mean, hopefully Canada will get there one day. Like we have like a World Cup where the top 8 countries compete against each other in a tournament, and like Japan kills it at that every year. China's also really good. I guess like some of my favorite wrestlers to watch are also like American wrestlers, just because they're like who I train with and stuff. So like when I was down in Colorado Springs, I was training with Sarah Hildebrandt. Like she's an amazing athlete, and like watching her compete like it's insane the stuff that she does, and just like that feel that she has. Like when I'm watching matches, like that's what I'm looking for, because like I don't know, I'm very adamant that like you can be a good athlete but not be a good wrestler, and you can be a good wrestler and not be a good athlete. So it's like when you see the perfect amalgamation of somebody who's like an amazing athlete and an amazing wrestler like come together, it's just like fantastic to watch, because not only do they have like the athleticism and the stamina and like the hard work and grit to be able to like wrestle that match, but their technique is just like amazing. Their feel, like just knowing that like if somebody's pushing into you, like using their momentum, like sometimes that's like you can try to teach that, but some people just have that naturally, that they just have that feel, they know.
Yeah, and you see that a lot like in jiu-jitsu around the Maritimes and in judo and any kind of combat sport, but it's a very, I would describe it as a very liquid style.
Yes.
Like it's just you have the ability to adjust to momentum and read the situation. Just maybe it's a fraction of a second faster than the next person, but that fraction of a second can be a game changer.
Yeah.
And you can pick up on that. Like it's really, there's a lot of guys locally that, you know, I get that. I get excited to watch them compete no matter where they are, because I get that vibe off of it. So I get that.
Do you think that that's an advantage that these countries have because of like population density, or is it training style? Like, do they structure their training differently than we do?
A little bit of both. I mean, like we do a lot of comparison about like Russian wrestling and stuff. Like they're basically like as soon as they walk, they're wrestling.
Right.
And like their like style of wrestling is so different. Like even when they're young, like they're doing crazy throws. Like they don't like pull their punches, so to speak. Whereas like when we're developing our kids, like we're super concerned with safety. So we don't teach some of those like risky positions or like high amplitude throws. But like I think that might be like one of the reasons why they're so good, is because like they're able to like move their body and have that body awareness of like doing all these crazy things without injuring their partner, like from a very, very young age. And I think like shying away from technique and stuff just because someone is young, like if you don't have that awareness, like if once you get into that situation when you're older and you like haven't practiced that, like you're more at risk for getting hurt because
you got to teach that, right?
Yeah.
But you have to wonder if it's because of their population that they're able to do that. Like they're starting with a greater number. It doesn't matter if you lose 40% of them to injuries, who's left are going to be really good.
Yeah.
Whereas
and it's
if we
just like
lose
in their
40%, we don't have
culture,
much
I feel
left.
like their
Yeah.
culture is totally different. Like
We have hockey, they have
yeah, it's like
grappling.
all the little kids like want to join hockey in Canada, whereas like in Russia, it's like they all wrestle. So I think like that's a huge thing that's different between some of our programs, is like, yes, they have those sheer numbers just because like that's what you do. Like if you want to be famous in that country, that's what you do.
Right.
It's like if you want to be famous in Canada, you don't wrestle. Like
No.
it's like nobody like who can name like famous Canadian wrestlers, like probably hardly anyone.
Do you ever get people that assume when you tell them that you're a wrestler that you're a pro wrestler,
Oh yeah.
like John Cena?
Yeah, so one time, actually, like I locked myself out of my car, and so my mom was like seeing this guy, and like she had told him that I wrestled, but like didn't really like specify or like talk about it a whole lot. So he thought like WWE. So I'm like talking about like I'm on the phone with my mom, and I'm like, yeah, I'm like trying to get back into my car. So I like had like a Civic at the time, like an old one that like had the little like lock like this, so you couldn't really hook it because it was like the little like pull lock. So I had to like wedge the like little coat hanger down to like my trunk release. So I popped the trunk, crawled into the car like through my trunk. And so my mom is like describing it to this guy, and he's like, "You mean your daughter can like fit into the like through the trunk of a car?"
Oh,
like,
I thought you were enormous.
yeah, he's thought he was like big WWE wrestler, and my mom's like, "No, she wrestles at 53 kilos," and he was like, "Oh, that kind of wrestling." Like,
That's funny.
Yeah. Now, next question is actually from my coach, Professor Meehan, and he was asking, like, where do you see the biggest areas of potential synergy between grappling sports looking forward? Like you mentioned, trying to broaden the audience, get more people interested, cross-train between different disciplines, or open up doors to move to other disciplines. Like where's the biggest opportunity to get that rolling?
I think like now that you guys are a PSO is huge. I think that like we have a tradition of like really strong programs in wrestling and judo, and now like grappling and like other combat sports, like with how popular MMA is and like UFC and stuff like that, like there's a lot of exposure for combat sports, and being able to like work together within our community to be able to like foster that. And like, for me, it's like not everyone is going to be an amazing wrestler. Like, doesn't matter. Like, come wrestle anyway. Like, not everyone's going to be great at grappling. Like, just try it and have fun. Like, find what you're good at and what you enjoy. And like, it doesn't matter if you're like going to be world class at that. Like, if you enjoy it, just do it.
You don't have to be good at it to enjoy it.
And I think
I'm
like,
living proof of that.
and I think like working together too, it's like somebody from judo like might be like really good at wrestling. Like
Right.
they just don't know because they haven't had that exposure.
Yeah.
So being able to like work together as a group and kind of like have athletes have exposure to like a bunch of different sports, like maybe they find like what they enjoy more or like what they're good at. It's like, I'm not necessarily personally invested in like having everyone join wrestling. Like if you're better at grappling, like go grapple. Like we'll teach you to do better like setups and takedowns and stuff. But like if grappling is your thing, like compete in grappling. Like I don't care if you like choose wrestling or not. Like if you're really good at judo, like we can help you with like some throws in wrestling, and vice versa. Wrestling can learn from like judo and like how good they are at throws. Like there's so much like transfer and like in between those sports that really like working together makes us all better.
Right.
And being even able to train together. Like we've had a couple like the judo guys come out to wrestling, and it's like they learn a lot from us like in takedowns. We learn a lot from them in like throws and ties and stuff. Like you can learn from each other, and like it makes everybody better. Like iron sharpens iron.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
The next one. Big question, but where do you see the
That's what I just read. That.
where do you see the future of grappling and grappling sports in New Brunswick and beyond?
Ooh, okay. Well, really, I want to see all of us get our numbers up. I mean, you guys are doing a really good job with like all the promotional stuff, and I think really like bringing awareness to the community about our programs, I think is really important, like at all levels. So like getting the kids involved, like getting adults involved, really just like having all of our clubs be like happy and thriving and like full of people, because like even if you're like not competition stream, it's like producing those people who are like national champions is great, but they also need training partners. So like having people come out, like one of the things that I've been able to do is like I have like multiple training partners that like if one person can only come out like once or twice a week, like I'm like, oh, what day works for you? Tuesday? Okay, great. Like Mario, come out Tuesday. Like, hey, promise, what days work for you? Monday and Wednesday? Okay, boom, Monday and Wednesday. Who's free on Thursday? Like I make it work with like multiple people's, because like really the number of people that like are gonna be at that like the highest level, like national champion, like world medalist, that can train like 6 days a week.
Super
Like,
uncommon.
Super uncommon, especially with a small population like New Brunswick. But having those people and having those bodies in the room and having people that are like willing to like get better and help out, like it's not like they come to help me out, but they also gain stuff from it too. Like they get to practice with a high level partner. They get to like learn new technique. They get the like staying in shape. Like there are so many benefits, and really I think that like I would love to see our programs in major cities like reviving wrestling in St. John, like making that available in other cities. Like I've had people contact me from like Woodstock, Edmundston, like those are places that could have wrestling programs that don't. So really I just want to make it available to more people in more communities, so that like I know our province is small, but like it sucks to drive like 45 minutes to an hour from Woodstock to come into Fredericton. Like it would be really great if we had those programs available for those people, so that they didn't have to travel such long distances to be able to like get exposure to that sport and train.
Now, next question's from Corey Forsyth.
How are you
former.
reading this?
I'm prepared, Josh. I've read them in advance. Just a little dig on you. Former 135-pound champion from Elite One, Corey Forsyth, and he was saying without the ability to use punches, because he's an MMA athlete, without the ability to use punches, he has a hard time setting up takedowns. So for somebody who, you know, in a pure grappling scenario, wrestling or jiu-jitsu, how would you recommend they work on their shots or their setups to get entries on takedowns?
Ooh, I'm gonna plug our technique videos. Tune in for our technique videos. They're released weekly. Yeah, so like one of the areas that I want to go over in those technique videos is like my favorite setups are 2-on-1s and arm drags. So really like we've been doing a lot of like in wrestling you do a lot of like head control, but we've been doing a lot of like low hand fighting just because it's easier to block the leg attacks when your hands are already down there. So really it's about like moving your opponent and creating those openings and doing that disruptive hand fighting. So I'm going to be doing that in the videos. Just wait.
Fantastic. Actually, just on that note, my former high school wrestling coach, Jeff Jones, used to have the saying, motion creates motion.
Yes.
And that's something, even in my professional career, like I talk about it all the time, we're stuck on a project or we're stuck trying to get something off the starting line. It's just, sometimes you just got to get something moving.
Yeah.
So I've always remembered that burned in my head, motion creates motion. Even though it often led to me taking a shitty, sloppy shot and I got sprawled and smashed, whatever.
You're still moving.
Still moving.
Yeah, because I think like the biggest thing with like hand fighting is that like we have a lot of people who like when our high school wrestlers come in, they all love collar ties and they do this like back and forth. And like really like all of your takedowns happen from like getting angles. So like one of the things that I'm going to be going over in the videos is like how to create those angles, because like if you're just taking straight attacks, like you're just doing this like back and forth dance where like neither of you is going to score.
Yeah, we see that a lot of like the lower belt levels, the beginner levels in our jiu-jitsu tournaments. It's literally they'll just push each other. It's like tug of war until one of them hits the crowd.
Yeah, so it's all about creating those angles,
right?
Which I will go over in the videos.
So yeah, obviously Sam just plugged up, but stay tuned. We have some excellent content upcoming.
Next is from Pat Foley, he's a judo black belt, jiu-jitsu brown belt. He's going to be doing some technique videos for us too. He considers himself an aging grappler, even though he's only in his early 40s. He said he's an aging grappler with a tortoise-like double leg. What would you suggest, drilling the double leg more or utilizing single leg takedowns and upper body clinch takedowns?
I would say probably both. I would say like you should probably work on like setups to the double leg, because really that's where like setting it up and being in like good body position is going to increase your chances of being able to score. But I would also say like there's nothing wrong with practicing like diversity in your takedowns. Like one of the things I love about wrestling is that it's really just like a tactical chess game, and it's like how all of those like pieces put together, like having different setups. Like I have like 5 or 6 different setups for my single leg. I have like a bunch of finishes for my single leg. I have my transitions on the ground, and being able to like pick those and put them together and like make that work for based on the opponent that I'm wrestling, like what's going to be most successful. Like that is how you lead to a higher percentage of like scoring on your takedowns, I think, is like having that diversity.
You see the opportunity, you're able to capitalize on it.
Yeah, and like the better your setup is, like even if your speed isn't like 100%, if you're able to set it up well, like you'll have a higher percentage of chance of scoring.
Yep, technique beats speed. Right.
This next one's my favorite question.
It's all yours, brother.
Who wins in a match versus you and Shaquille O'Neal? And why is it you?
Well, first of all, I have the speed, I have the technique, I have the experience. I would say I would probably have to utilize the element of surprise, because if he knows I'm coming and gets his hands on me, just the sheer size difference between us.
Jump off a building onto his shoulders or something?
Yeah, as a professional wrestler at 53 kilograms, that's a substantial size difference.
Yeah, even when like, I mean, the fact that he doesn't have wrestling experience would probably be to my benefit. Because when I've wrestled people that are bigger than me and they have wrestling experience, it's just like, they know an attack is coming. They know what the defense is. Like, it just makes it so much harder. Like, even if you're faster than them, like if they get their weight on you, you're done. So tough. You really have to be able to like outmaneuver the person. Like you have to deke them out, like fake ones that go the other side, like, and always take outside attacks. Never shoot straight underneath their hips, because they get their weight on you.
Oh, with Shaq, you can just go right in between, like right underneath.
Yeah.
Just right in the middle.
By the time he sprawled, you'd already be on his back.
Attack of choice would probably be foot sweep. Just like once you get them off balance, like the bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Right. Can you tell us about your training and your diet protocol? I know you talked about camp in the States, but diet protocol.
Yeah. So basically, like wrestling changed its rules a couple years ago, where now we have same day weigh-ins. So we have 2-hour weigh-ins. You have to weigh in the morning. 2 hours later, you start your competition. So that really like changed the game for a lot of people.
I like it.
Yeah, I was always same day weigh-ins when I wrestled in junior high and high school.
Safer.
Yeah, sometimes people were cutting like massive amounts of weight, and then by the time you wrestled them the next day, they'd have gained back like 5 or 6 kilos.
Oh yeah.
Like it was insane. So now people have to be a lot closer to their weight class. And really, I think like, I don't know, like we use the term diet, I guess, but like I think about it as like fueling for performance. Like really it's just about like eating the proper amounts of like macronutrients to be successful like in your training and your competition. So like being able to like, I do have to do some stuff where like I like junk food, I like sugar. So like when it comes time to like prepare for a competition, those are the things that I do have to like cut out. But really I think like eating candy and like junk food, stuff like that, like probably isn't the best for your performance anyway.
I disagree.
I mean, it is just carbs, but like everything in moderation.
I
You
think
can't.
chocolate's the key to my success. I don't have any success.
So really, I think it's about like I like work with my like strength and conditioning coach, Chris Schneer, like also helps me out with my diet. And we do have a registered dietitian with Wrestling Canada,
Oh, wow.
who helps with some of that like weight monitoring and stuff. Because when it like usually like what I walk around like outside of season is like not my competitive weight. Like I'm a lot heavier. Just because I think like being down at that competitive weight is like that can increase your risk of injury. Like your body fat percentage is so low, especially for female athletes. I feel like if your body fat percentage is too low and you're like really like reduced calories, that's when you get into like the female athlete triad. And like I've found that like it's not healthy to not have your period. Like, so like one of the things for female athletes is like keeping your body fat percentage a little higher just to make sure that your like body's regulating itself properly and that like you don't mess with your hormones too much. Because if you cut massive amounts of weight, like that has serious like health impacts.
Your body thinks you're dying.
Yeah.
Yep.
So really it's about like maintaining that like higher amount of calories and like having a little bit more body weight like out of season, so that when it comes time like 6 weeks out from a competition is when I start like getting back into competition shape and like start reducing a little bit. I usually lose about like 3 kilos through like dieting and training. And then like what I cut in water weight is like very little, like it's less than 2 kilos. So really I try to get down to like a closer weight so that I'm not cutting like huge amounts of water weight, just because like being dehydrated for an extended period of time is also not great for you.
Yeah,
And
100%.
people think because you can gain that, you know, depending on who you are for MMA and stuff, 10 to 15 pounds back in 24 hours, you're not actually hydrated. Your body it's not going into your system. You're not protecting your brain. It's just all in your intestines.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that I've like really had to do is kind of like I think we have this perception of like what's a good food to eat and what's a bad food to eat. And I think that like nothing is like inherently good or bad. It's like everything in moderation. Like carbs aren't bad for you. Carbs are what like fuel your glycogen stores, that like that's why you're able to like perform and go out there and compete. Yeah. Like you need protein to be able to like rebuild your like muscles and like tissue and stuff after a workout. Like fat is needed to like protect your internal organs, and like your body needs fat. Like, so none of those are like inherently bad. It's like finding the macronutrient distribution that like works for you. And I think like as athletes, we need to have like a very high protein content just for that recovery and for like fueling our muscles and like maintaining strength, so that even when we're like cutting down to a weight class, we're still staying as strong as we can in that weight class. So that's been like one of the things that I've done with my diet in order to be successful, is like high protein, and then like keeping my carbs high. And then like fat is just like the carbs and fat, you can do whatever you want. Like if you want to do, like I wouldn't recommend for like high performance athletes to do the keto diet, but like I know some people have tried it and been successful. Yeah, you really have to find like what works for you and like stick to that, because like what's going to work for me is different from somebody else. Like a 53 kilo female versus like a heavyweight male, like there's so many differences like based on your weight class and
body composition and everything else.
Exactly.
The next question, actually, it's a great one for anybody watching. The differences between Greco-Roman and freestyle wrestling. Is one harder or more difficult than the other?
So freestyle is like everything. Greco-Roman is strictly upper body, so you're not allowed to do leg attacks.
When she says everything, it's not like catch as catch can.
Everything that's not like against the joint, and like I guess the rules of wrestling are like no striking, no like submissions, no like dirty stuff, like no hair pulling, eye gouging, that kind of stuff.
You think that's dirty?
As like a lot of people, especially in women's wrestling, there's a lot of hair pulling, like secret hair pulling.
I always did the like knuckle drag across the ribs when the ref couldn't see it.
You do like the knuckle drag across the ribs.
Now I don't hide it.
And I have had like, we had an Iranian wrestler come in and he was like, oh, when ref no look, and he would teach us like these little things that you can do with like when the ref's not looking. That's not the stuff that like I don't promote that. But yeah.
So that will not form part of our technique videos.
That will not be in the technique videos, unfortunately. There will be no when ref no look.
Have you ever tried submission grappling at all?
Oh, I have actually. I went to, back when like wrestling was trying to take over grappling, I went to the Grappling World Championships. And it did not go well because I had like no grappling training. And so I had no idea how to like get into submissions or like
get to the position
or get out of submissions. Yeah, exactly. So I was like really good at takedowns, and like I had a lot of points from scoring because it was like, oh, like I take the person down, I get points. I like get into a better position, like I get side mount, like boom, more points. I get full mount, boom, more points. I take their back, boom, more points. But like I had no idea how to do submissions, and if they went for one, I just kind of was like, oh, okay, they have my arm, like what do I do?
Yeah, take my arm back.
Can you read the next one?
I can, and it's a silly question, but where did Cotton Eye Joe come from or go to?
I have no idea.
It's a safe answer.
It's not my forte.
Do you have any tips on entries for the fireman carry?
Yeah, so I'd say like the biggest thing on that is, I guess now we have to call it an entrance step. One of the things that we've been doing with like all the stuff that came out with like safe sport and stuff is like change our culture and change our language. So we used to call it a penetration step. So now we call it an entrance step. So really your entrance step is like the most important part, because really you're trying to get underneath the person's hips. And like one of the things we drill when we're doing like speed drills and stuff is like not even having the like arm that goes through the legs, because really that's just a guide. Like you don't need it.
If you buckle their center of gravity.
Yeah, and so there's fireman's carries that happen in Greco where you're not allowed to touch the legs. You just have the 2-on-1, and you like need to get in under the person's like center of gravity to be able to pop them over. So really it's about like how deep you can get in. Same with like anything like shoulder throws, you're gonna be way more successful like the deeper you get in, because really it's like in combat sports, space is the enemy. You like don't wanna have a lot of space between you. You wanna be as close as you possibly can be. So really that's like the best way I can describe how to optimize that.
That's just a great answer. It's one thing with jiu-jitsu too, like it's knowing the difference between when you want to stack and keep proximity and when you want distance and space. Because in submission techniques, there's times, or defenses for submission techniques, there's times you want to be really close, and there's times you want to create that distance.
Yeah.
So knowing when to manipulate each is a key detail. So there you have it, Grant. It's the entrance step is the important piece.
What's the worst weight cut you've ever completed, and what did you get? What did you do to get yourself through that?
Oh, I mean, weight cutting is never fun. It's just like a part of the sport. It's something you have to do. I would say probably my worst one was like, I basically like when I moved to New Brunswick, I was kind of like, I used to wrestle 51. And at the time, the Olympic weight classes were 48 and 55. So I was like, either have to cut down to 48 or try to go up to 55. And I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, there's obviously good competitors at both weight classes. And so like sitting down with the coaching staff and like everyone in the support team and kind of like deciding where I was going to go, and like based on my body composition at the time, like what would be the better thing to do. And really we looked at like, okay, like I'm young, like longevity in the sport, like really the best thing to do would probably be to put on mass and to go up to 55. So I started my like bulking and hypertrophy program, which like sounds great because like you can eat a whole bunch of food, but it all has to be healthy food because you still have to fuel properly. So you can't just like eat junk food or you're going to get like super fat.
Eat
like
15 pounds of broccoli.
Yeah. So you also have to watch like the macronutrient distribution in the foods that you're eating, even if you're on like a bulking program. So like, it's not about like eating stuff that has like a lot of like high fat content, and it's about like progressing like slowly. You want to gain like a kilo like every couple weeks kind of thing to like basically try to like do it slowly. Yeah. So, and it's, especially difficult when you're like still training at a high level because you're going to like, your body's going to want to like shed that weight. So it's about like eating in like a calorie surplus every day and like doing it in a smart way so that you're not like overloading yourself. And really about like making small changes. Like I would drink like 2% milk instead of skim. I would eat like a a bagel for breakfast instead of toast because it like is more calorie dense. I would double my like peanut butter. So if you're like usually eat like a tablespoon, I'd eat 2 tablespoons. Like
in little ways to add the calories.
Yeah.
You're still getting a decent macro kind of profile.
Yeah, and without going like totally crazy. Like you want to be like over enough that like you're not putting on like massive amounts of like your body's going to want to store it as fat. So you have to be able to like still do those like high level strength training to try to build muscle mass and put on weight slowly enough that you're not like totally changing your body content and composition.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I was like going up, I did that very successful. And I got up to like 60 kilos, I think, and had to like get back down to 55.
Wow.
Yeah, so that
You're good at
was,
bulking.
yeah, very good at bulking. My body wants to like pack on the mass. So yeah, what happened was like our Olympic trials in 2012, and like granted I was like very young and we just wanted to go for like the experience of the competition and like win a couple matches, but really like at the time 2-time Olympic medalist Tanya Verbeek was in my weight class. So now 3-time Olympic medalist Tanya Verbeek,
Tall order.
who was retired, yeah, that was her weight class. So it was like we kind of knew like, okay, like let's go in with no expectations, like let's just get this experience. Like she's like much older, much more experienced athlete, but we wanted to see like how I would do. But our Olympic trials are always in December, which like at the time being in university, having just like gone through a year of like doing this bulking and like not having to cut for a while, my body hadn't cut for a long time. I was like heavy, I was under stress because it was like our exam period.
Right.
And so I had to cut 5.3 kilos, most I've ever done. And at this time it was
What period of time?
in a day.
In a day.
Oh my.
That would be hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was trying to like reduce my calories and diet, but like the weight wasn't coming off.
Yeah.
Like my body just was holding on to it because of the stress, because of the like difficulty
Yeah.
sleeping. Like all of those factors just kind of like meant that my body was like holding on to everything. It was like retaining water and all that stuff. So when I got there and I saw that I had like that much weight to cut, I was just like, oh my goodness, how am I gonna do this? And it was like the next weight class up was like 63. So like there's
That's a big
not a
drop.
chance I'm wrestling 63. Like these are all people that are cutting down from like God knows where to wrestle 63. So I was like, I have to do this. So we basically like saunaed. And this was like the worst weight cut by far. Like I had like cramping everywhere because of the like weight cut.
Hydration and yeah.
It got to the point where like, you feel like you have to go to the washroom, but like nothing will come out because there's like nothing in you. It was like the most uncomfortable feeling.
I've done the same cut, I don't know, probably 6 times like that, like 10 to 15 pound range. And
Yeah.
it's like you go to sleep the night before because we were able to weigh in the night before or the day before, and you're cramping. You can't sleep because
Yeah.
you're spasming and stuff in your sleep.
Yeah, which is now like all the dieting and stuff, and like I do so much like the mental performance side of things. Like I do so much like meditation, journaling, like all of that stuff to keep my like stress levels low and like just be like chill a lot of the time.
That sort of leads into like my last question is, what advice would you give to somebody going into their very first competition ever, like somebody who trains recreationally and they just want to try it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like setting performance goals for yourself. Like you can definitely like, that's one of the biggest things when I talk about goal setting is like talking about like my mental performance consultant talks about like focusing on the P's, not the O's. So like, don't worry about when you're going into a competition, don't worry about your opponent and don't worry about the outcome. Focus on like your performance and your preparation. Because
I like that. Yeah.
really that's like the biggest thing. Like if you take care of that like performance goals, and if you like focusing on your preparation like gives you confidence. Like I have done this much training, I know I'm fit, I know I'm a good wrestler, like those kind of things. Like that's your like preparation leading into that event. That gives you confidence when you step on the mat, you know you're ready. And then focusing on your performance is like the things that you want to do to be successful. So like for me, like my favorite attack is single leg takedown. It's like that's what I'm focused on getting in the match. Like if you focus on the outcome, like you will not get the outcome, because like how do you get there? You need to focus on what you need to do in order to secure the outcome, because like the outcome isn't guaranteed. Like you still have a competitor that has also done their fair share of like preparation and has their own performance goals. So really it's like a technical chess match out there, and like you can do all the right things and like wrestle the best match and like not get the outcome that you wanted. Like I have wrestled matches where I felt like I wrestled amazing. I felt like I did everything that I could do and I still like lost the match. It's like you can't be upset when you've given your best effort and the person just happens to be like better than you, or like
Had a better day.
Had a better day, got into a better position, like the scrambles that you got into, like maybe that person gave you very little openings and like they just happened to optimize on like a reattack or something like that. Like if you still wrestled well and gave it your best effort, like there's no, like you can't be disappointed in yourself.
That's fantastic advice. Well, that concludes the Ask Me Anything session. So first, Samantha, I want to say thank you so much for joining us. It was a real privilege to be able to hear your story and your input and your insights on a variety of topics. Obviously, wish you the absolute best in your upcoming competitive career, because you have 2 big tournaments coming up in the month of May. So looking forward to seeing that. For everybody who has been watching, keep an eye on our YouTube and social media. We're thrilled to announce, we kind of plugged it earlier, but some technique videos upcoming with Samantha Stewart helping us with some directly applicable wrestling to grappling and stuff. So those will be outstanding. Keep an eye out for those. As always, want to thank our great friends and sponsors, Creative Lifestyle Studio, who's here making us look good and documenting the whole thing as they do for the jiu-jitsu community at large. Cask and Kettle for giving us a wonderful place to have breakfast and shoot these things. And a brand new sponsor who's actually helping us sponsor specifically these takedown series and the wrestling series at Ceru Canada. So look out for those guys. Anything else you want to throw out there, my friend?
That's it.
Anything you want to say before we wrap up, Samantha?
Follow Wrestling New Brunswick.
Absolutely. Check out the social media and definitely keep an eye out for the Learn to Wrestle programs and other clinics. We're looking forward to more collaboration.
I think they're actually on all social media platforms. So Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, wherever you can find them.
Fantastic.
And I am too, if you want to follow me individually as an athlete. So.
And please do, because the career is going to be one to watch. So thanks very much. Glad to have you guys, and we'll have some breakfast.